Welcome to Excel and Business Math video number 33. Hey, in this video, we got to talk about the most amazing VLOOKUP function for incentive pay, and we'll look at both commission pay and piecework pay. Now, here's all of our topics, and we have epic topics on incentive pay and the VLOOKUP function. But here's the essence of why video number 33, along with video number 23, 10 videos ago, are so important for you and your job. Here's a bunch of calculations we have to make. This is a piecework, but it could just as easily be a commission pay example. But these are a lot of steps to come up with one gross pay number. And the problem with commissions and piecework gross pay calculations is they're oftentimes not pre-programmed into your accounting programs like QuickBooks and other pre-made programs. So guess what? When you get to commissions and piecework calculations, you either have to do it on a piece of paper or you can do it in Excel step by step by step. But the problem is it takes too long and it's prone to errors. So in this video, the most important two things we will learn is how to build a lookup table that the VLOOKUP function can interpret correctly, including this amazing formula here. And then we'll see how to use the VLOOKUP function that will automate all of these calculations so we can simply type in any employee's number of items made or amount of sales made, and instantly our formula will tell us what the gross pay is. Not only that, but being able to build this sort of lookup table and use VLOOKUP will help us with other important business topics like federal income tax formulas, where we have lots of different categories for different tax rates. But taxes are next video. We want to start off by going to the sheet incentive pay. Now, incentive pay rates, that just means you're not paid by the hour or by the month or year. This means that you get paid based on your performance, such as how many items you made or how much you sold. Incentive pay is simple. The more you make or sell, the more you're paid. So the employee hopefully has an incentive to become more efficient, to make more or sell more. Now, this example is gel boomerangs. Here's a Busn boomerang. That's the company I used to run many years ago where we manufactured boomerangs. Now, a boomerang company pays employees in various ways. Straight piecework, variable piecework. We could have straight commission rate, variable commission rate, and commission rate based on sales amount. Now, all of these examples are just a few different possible examples that an employee contract could use to pay an employee. But straight piecework, as an example, the manufacturer gets paid $1.35 per one Busn boomerang made. 10 boomerangs would be $13.50. Variable piece rate. The person making the boomerang gets paid a different rate based on the quantity made. So the first 75, the person gets paid $1.05 for each one. But as soon as they pass 75 all the way up to 120, they get paid $1.35 each. 121 or more, they get paid $1.75. Now, what makes this calculation complicated is we have to break apart the total number made for the day or for whatever period and calculate three different amounts and then add them. Now, commission rate. An employee making sales calls and sales may have a contract that says salesperson gets a base monthly salary of $3,000. That's not incentive. That's just a straight amount per month. But then on top of that, there's an incentive, 1.5% of the total sales they made for the month. That's a straight rate because 1.5 is applied to all sales. Variable commission rate. Salesperson could get a base salary of $3,000 plus 1% for 0 all the way up to $9,999.99. Once they jump over the $10,000 hurdle, then they get 1.5% all the way up to $1,999, and then 3% for $20,000 or more. There's a little table. Now, the trick to both variable piece rate and variable commission rate is we're oftentimes given this data. It could be in the employment contract. It could be in an Excel spreadsheet. It could be in an email, or it even could be written down. We're going to have to take this information if we want to automate the process and build a proper lookup table. Now, here's another example. This is commission rate based on sales amount. A salesperson gets a base monthly salary of $2,000 plus a percentage of total sales they made for the month based on the amount of sales they made determined by this table. Now, whereas here we have to calculate different amounts at different rates, this table here just determines if you made $35,000 in sales for the month, your straight or flat commission rate would be 3.75. So in this example, you'd get your $2,000 plus if you made $35,000, you just take the $35,000 times 3.75 and add that to the $2,000 to get the gross pay. All right, we're going to see all of these examples and more. Let's now go over to the sheet straight piecework. Example 1, our goal is to calculate gross pay for straight piecework. The pay is $1.35 per one boomerang. Well, if it's $1.35 and the employee made $127, this is a simple multiplication problem. And we don't have to round because we don't have any extraneous decimals here. We're not adding, so I simply take, hey, there's the total units times the amount per 1 unit. When I hit Enter, that's the total gross pay. In our second straight piecework example, the employee has the opportunity to make small lamps at $1.01 each, shades at 27.5 cents each, and large lamps at $1.27.5. So if we already have the items, the quantity made for the period, and the amounts, we simply multiply each and then add. We definitely have to use round here because we have extraneous pennies here. Equals round, tab. Arrow over to get, hey, that's how much per one, times arrow over to get number made, comma. Number of digits, we're rounding to the penny, so we put a 2. That tells round to the penny. Control Enter. Copy down. Go to the last cell, hit F2. Cell references are looking good. Enter. Now we need to add, so we use our keyboard for the sum function, Alt equals. That's looking good, and Enter. So 96.97. So straight piecework, very easy to calculate. Now we got to go talk about variable piecework. And we're going to go to the sheet VP longhand. Now, normally you would just get this information here and the amount, and you'd have to scratch out all of the calculations. Now, I didn't want to bore you with typing while we're doing this video, but this is a lot of steps. Notice I'm following Excel's golden rule. There's the label, there's the number. There's the label, there's the number. So we have our first category up to 75 at 105. So gross pay number 1. Well, wait a second. I even had to consider something before I started this calculation. I actually had to compare these two. Is the upper limit for the first category, that's this 75 right here, is it bigger than the number made? False. So I have to use the whole 75 for my first calculation. Now, we don't have any extraneous decimals here, so we're not going to use round. I take the amount per one times 75. That gives me 78.75. That's the amount just for that first category. Now we have to calculate how many remain. There's the total. We subtract the number of units we used in our first gross pay calculation, which happens to be the upper limit for that first category. When I hit Enter, 62 left. Now we have upper limit for the second category. Well, wait a second. I actually have to calculate the total number possible in the second category. And the way you calculate the number for any category is you take the upper limit from this category and subtract from it the upper limit from the previous category. So that's what we're going to do here. Equals, well, there's the 120 minus the upper limit from the previous category. When I hit enter, 45 units are possible in category 2. Now I compare 45 to 62. 45 is smaller, so I use the whole 45 times 135 to get gross pay 2 equals amount for 1 unit in category 2 times the total number of units for category 2 and enter. Gross pay number 2, 60.75. Now I have to figure out what remains after this second calculation. Equals. Well, we started with 62, and now we subtract how many we just accounted for and enter. So 17 are left. Since there's only one category, we simply multiply the 17 times 1.75. $1.75 per 1 boomerang times 17 boomerangs. And enter. Now we have 1, 2, 3 gross pay calculations. We can simply add equals. There's number 3 plus number 2 plus number 1. When I hit enter, that's the gross pay. Now, as we mentioned at the outset of this video, that's a lot of calculations. Whether you do it on paper or this method right here in Excel, it takes too long. It's prone to errors. And the biggest problem is if I wanted to use this as a template in Excel, if I change the number here to 45, that number is not even remotely correct. Control Z to undo that. So instead of doing it this step-by-step longhand, we want to first look at a lookup table method. So we're going to go over to variable piecework lookup table. Now, if you're lucky enough to be given a lookup table like this that describes exactly the categories, the upper limit, the lower limit, the price for each category, and then 2 extra columns that have the necessary information. So we can simply look at the number of units made, find the correct category, and then all of the data we need to make our gross pay calculation will be on one row. Now on this sheet here, we're going to see 4 examples of how to use the table. Then in our next example, we'll see how to make the table from scratch. And then we'll learn about the VLOOKUP function. Now, the thing that makes this table work is this last column, because that 139.50 represents all of the possible earnings for this piecework from the previous categories. That number is going to help greatly. But also, if we're going to look up whatever number of boomerangs is made here, find the category, we're also going to need on this row the upper limit from the previous category. That number right there will allow us to find out how many units we multiply by 1.75. Once we have those units, we're done. We take the amount from all the previous categories, the units from the current category times 1.75, and we have our gross pay. All right, let's see how to make this calculation. Very first thing, we'll look at the number, figure out which category. We know it's the third row, so we start our formula. Equal sign. We take all of the earnings from the previous categories. Then we have to add it. Now we need to calculate the actual units to multiply by 1.75. In parentheses, we take all of our units and we subtract upper unit from the previous category. Now I close parentheses. What's 137 minus 120? It's 17, just as we got when we did our calculation longhand. Now we multiply it by the 1.75. Now notice that formula is taking all of its inputs from the row for our category and the actual number of units. So when I hit enter, that's our calculation. So if you are given a table like this, or later when we build our own, the calculation is so much easier. All right, that's example number 4, but our first example of how to use a lookup table. Let's look at our next example. All right, so we have 119 units. The very first step is we have to find our category. It looks like it's the second row. Now notice when we're determining which category, we are probably looking right here. We're saying 119 fits between 76 and 120. But there's another way to figure out which category. Look at that 119 and start looking through the column. And when you bump into the first number that's bigger, 121 in this column is the first number bigger than 119. You jump back a row, and that's how you determine which row to use in the lookup table. Now, because not all tables have this category, sometimes you have to use the lower limit column to determine which row to use. Step 1, figure out which category. Now we do our formula. Equals, oh, I get all of the earnings from the previous category, plus, now I need number of units to multiply times 1.35. So in parentheses, I take total number made. I subtract the upper limit from the previous category, which is conveniently listed on this row. Close parentheses. Now I multiply times the actual pay per unit for this category. And that formula will work. And enter. 138.15. All right, our next example. Here we have 74. We look at that number. We find the category. We either use this, which we're not going to be able to use later, or we compare 74. Finding the first number bigger, that's 76, so we know to jump back. That's our row. That's our category. Now we can make our formula. Equals, oh, and I'm going to belabor the point because our formula later will always do this. There's the earnings from the previous category, plus, in parentheses, the total number of units that this person made. We subtract all the units from the previous category. Again, that's 0. Close parentheses. Now we multiply. Notice 74 minus 0 is 74. So we multiply 74 times 1.05. And when I hit enter, that's the gross pay, $77.70. Now, even though this formula was a little bit silly because we used zeros, notice the convenience is it's the same formula every time. Now let's look at our fourth example here, example 7 overall. Here we have a much larger lookup table. Lots of different categories. There's our 137. So to make our formula, we still do the same thing. Figure out which category this fits in. I'm racing through here. I find the first number bigger, 151, so I jump back. That's the row. Now I make my formula. Equals all of the earnings already calculated from previous categories. Now I add. In parentheses, I take the total units made minus upper limit from the previous category, close parentheses, and now I multiply that by the 1.75 and enter 163.50. Now you could prove this to yourselves by doing it longhand. This is a simulation of the longhand method we did on the previous sheet. Well, 137. Well, I know I need to take the first 50 times $1. Then I'm going to add to that. I don't know how many are in this category, but no problem. Open parentheses. Hey, look at that. I take the upper limit from this category minus the upper limit from the previous category. That'll give me 25. And I multiply that times the 110. Wow, now I have to add again. So in parentheses, upper limit for this category minus the upper limit from the previous times pay per unit for this category. Now I still have 137. Wow, so the upper limit there, 130. I have another one. In parentheses, the upper limit for this category minus the upper limit from the previous category, close parentheses, times $1.50. Oh, look at that. I still have 137, so I have to figure out how many from this category here, plus, in parentheses, now I take the number of units we have, minus upper limit from the previous category, close parentheses, times price per unit for this category, and enter. I never want to have to do that again. That formula is way too long. Luckily, we were given the lookup table, so all we had to do is this short formula here. Now, what happens if you're not given the table? Can we create it if we're given the upper or lower limits in pay? Well, you bet. We just have to add these two extra columns. So let's go see how to do that. I'm going to scroll over and go to the sheet VP, Create Lookup Table. Now, this is common. You are given either in an employment contract or an email or an Excel spreadsheet. There's a description for how the person should be paid. So what do? We have to create the lookup table. Now, I'm going to start by listing the labels at the top. We'll start with category, even though later we won't need this column. Tab, units lower limit, tab, units upper limit, tab, pay per unit, tab, number made through previous category, that's the upper limit from the previous category, tab, and then the ever important earnings through previous categories column. Now I'm going to highlight all of these, go up to the Home Ribbon tab. I want to wrap text, add some fill, add a font color. We have 6 categories, so I'm going to highlight 6 rows below. Right-clicking on the mini toolbar. Let's add all borders. Now we're going to start with lower limit, 0 to 50. Oftentimes it says 1 to 50, but I'm going to start with 0. That helps our VLOOKUP function later. So lower limit, tab, units upper limit. For this category, it's 50, and enter. Now I'm going to make a formula here. Since this is units, I'm going to take as a relative cell reference upper limit from the previous category and simply add 1. That way I don't have to type, and it's more accurate. Copy it down. Now I can simply list the upper limit. Looking up here, I'm going to type 75, enter, 110, enter, 130, enter, 15, and that will do it. The last one is more. Now I want to come over here and create the category. We saw a text formula earlier in the class, equal sign. I'm going to click on the lower limit, but then I'm going to use the ampersand, the join symbol, Shift 7. If we want text in a formula, we always have to use double quotes. I'm going to do a space, a dash, a space, and double quote. Right now I've joined whatever's in relative cell reference to that text. Now I'm going to use another ampersand, the join symbol, and click on the upper limit. Control-Enter, and copy it down. Price per, I'm simply copying from up here. 1, 1.1, 1.25, 1.5, 1.75, and 2. If I want to add some formatting, Home Ribbon tab, drop-down currency. Now, I'm going to add some green over here since these are formulas. Right-clicking on the mini toolbar, there's our fill. Also here. And we're going to have formulas over here, so I'm going to add the green. Of course, the beauty of the green is now we can clearly see these are the only inputs. Everything else is a formula. All right, so we have 1, 2 columns with formulas. But first, we need a 0. Number made through previous category, well, it's 0 here. And also, earnings through previous categories, 0. Now, this column is straightforward. Since it's always the upper limit from the previous, we simply say, hey, there's a relative cell reference looking at the upper limit from the previous category. Control-Enter, and copy it down. Now, for our earnings column, well, we can make our calculation calculating all the earnings from the first category here simply by taking, hey, that's the total units, that's the units upper limit from the first category times price per unit, and hit Enter. Now, when we get down here, we're going to have to make a slightly different calculation. Now, notice F2, that's a calculation figuring out the earnings earned from the previous category. Enter. Well, how would we do that here? We can't just use 75 because that's the cumulative total. Inside our formula, we're actually going to have to take 75 minus 50. But guess what? We already have the 75 and 50 right here. So right in the cell, and I'm going to put this in parentheses, I'm going to say upper limit from the previous category minus the upper limit from 2 categories ago. Remember, the meaning of this when I Control-Enter is how many we actually made in total for the previous category. Now, F2, I multiply that by from the previous category, price per unit, Control-Enter. Now, that's the amount in total paid for 25 units from the previous category. But really, I need a cumulative total. That 2750 should really be 7750. F2, so what do we have to do? We have to add whatever we calculated from the previous row for earnings through previous categories. Control-Enter, and copy it down. And that will work all the way down. Well, the person making the boomerangs would love that. Luckily, we can see that there's an error here. $125. No, I don't think so. So I'm going to put a decimal right here and enter, and there you go. Now, notice we had a different formula here. Sometimes that's OK to have in a column different formulas, but I don't like that. That makes me nervous. So I'm actually going to copy it up because guess what? It will work perfectly. If I F2, that's just working off those zeros. So now we have the same formula all the way down. And that really is the hard part of creating your own lookup table. Now, we'll have a few examples in this video, and there's a bunch of homework problems for you to practice. But if you have this skill, and you're given something like this, and you can build this table, you are going to be a superstar at your work. And really, this is the real business math we should be learning, because out in the business world, we're not doing it on paper. We're not doing it with a handheld calculator. We need to build a solution like this that can make our calculations automatic and easy. Now, let's see if we can calculate, based on 137, our gross pay. Well, we've already done this calculation before. And because we're going to repeat it a few times, I want to do a little trick up here. I want to actually type column numbers up here and then write 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 using the tab key. Because guess what? This is a lookup table, and it's going to become really important to know which numbered column it is. For us, we did this calculation before, and we know we're going to have to take from the right category the number from column 5. Then we're going to have to add to it in parentheses this number and subtract whatever's from column 4, and then multiply that amount from whatever's in column 3. So the pattern is this, equals for the right category. So we've looked this up and determined that this is the right category. Whatever's in column 5 plus in parentheses total units minus whatever's in column 4, close parentheses, times whatever's in column 3, and enter. 163.50. This is what I don't ever want to have to do. Oh, that is painful. It'll get us the right answer, but that's ridiculous. Now, once we have the table like this, we can use it over and over. In fact, we can copy and paste this wherever we want. Here we have 3 employees. They've reported 116.72 and 152. We know our formula equals, I got to look this 116 up and find the right category. I'm going to look through the lower limit column, find the first number bigger. 131 is the first number bigger than 116. So I know the row above is the category. So I go column 5 plus in parentheses whatever the total units are minus column 4, close parentheses, times whatever's in column 3, and enter. Now for Gigi, I have to look up 72. I race down, I bump into the first one bigger, and I jump back. So I know the second row is what I want. The formula, column 5 plus in parentheses, the total units that Gigi made minus column 4, close parentheses, times column 3. All those numbers are in the correct row for that category, and enter. All right, 152 Kenya. Well, I'm racing through. Oh, I can't find any number bigger, so that means I take the last category or the last row. Equals column 5 plus in parentheses, whatever the units for the employee are, minus column 4, close parentheses, times column 3, and enter. Now, understanding the column numbers means we're almost all the way to fully automating our process. Right now, these formulas are not automatic. I cannot copy that formula down the column. In order for us to create a formula that we could copy down, that means somehow right there, using this lookup value, I would have to have some function know to look through this table, find the right category, and get the thing from column 5. Then I'd have to use the same function to look up column 4 and then column 3. No problem. The name of the function that allows us to do lookup and pick whichever column we want is VLOOKUP. Now, this is a lookup table. That's why VLOOKUP is called VLOOKUP. The reason it's got a V is because the categories are listed vertically. So VLOOKUP, let's see how to do this. We're going to go over to this sheet, VLOOKUP. Now, all we're given is 137. But luckily, the employee who made 137 uses the same lookup table. So guess what? Let's go back over. This lookup table that we so carefully created, we can simply copy and paste it wherever we want to use it. So I'm going to highlight it, Control-C, go over to VP Lookup, and in B3, I'm going to Control-V. All right, so this is exciting. We're actually going to have to look up 3 things, right? So I want to look up earnings made through previous category. That means column 5. This will be the first time we've seen equal VL. And there it is. VLOOKUP. Looks for value in the leftmost column of the table. That's our first column. And then returns a value in the same row from a column you specify. Man, that seems like the perfect magic cure for our lookup variable piece rate. So I'm going to hit Tab and accept VLOOKUP. Now, in the PDF notes and in the notes below, I have all sorts of notes if you want to read all about the different arguments. But there are 1, 2, 3, and 4 different arguments. They are going to seem like eating candy compared to that longhand method we did. Lookup value. Just as we've been doing as we've practiced using a lookup table, we had to look here and then find the right category. Well, VLOOKUP can do that automatically as long as you put the number into lookup value, comma, table array. That's the name of the argument that means please show the VLOOKUP function where the table is. Now, VLOOKUP does not use this category. You cannot include this in the table. That's why we very carefully numbered them at the top, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The first column always has to be the lower limit, and the categories have to be listed from smallest to biggest. If the first column isn't listed smallest to biggest, then VLOOKUP won't work. So watch this for the table. I just highlight. All 5 columns, never the category, and you do not include any field names or column headers at the top. Just lower limit, and then all of the potential columns that you want to go and get stuff from and bring back to the cell. Comma. This is column index number. Just as we've been practicing, we need a 5, we need a 4, we need a 3. We have to tell VLOOKUP which one of the columns. And it is counting on your fingers. It's not C column, D column. It's always just look at your table. How many columns are there? There are 5. Since earnings through previous category is the 5th column, we simply put a 5 here. That tells VLOOKUP which column to go and get the item from, comma. Now, VLOOKUP has two different types of lookup. The type of lookup we're doing is called approximate match. That means VLOOKUP will take the 137, race through the first column, and when it finds the first big one, it will know to jump back. Then it automatically knows which row. We give it the 5 column, VLOOKUP figures out the row, and boom, it'll go and get that 151.25. So approximate match is what you do when you have variable piece rates, like we have here with units, when we have sales for commission tables, when we have income for income taxes, and all sorts of other examples. Later, even in this video and later in the class, we'll see how to use exact match. That's when you're looking up something like a product name and you want to go get a price. Now, the cool thing about approximate match is that we can double click this, and that true tells VLOOKUP to do approximate match. I'm going to backspace. If you choose false, that tells VLOOKUP to do exact match, which would not work here at all. Exact match false, that's only for looking up names and things like that. Now I'm going to backspace. The cool thing about approximate is VLOOKUP will understand that you want to do approximate match if you put true or you leave it out. Now, they programmed it like that because the most common type of lookup is not exact match. It's approximate match for things like taxes, commissions, and variable piece rate. So we don't even have to put that in. Watch this. I'm going to backspace. That means that's all we have to put into the cell, and it will automatically go and get the right earnings. Now, one thing you want to make sure, comma, don't even go to the fourth argument range lookup if you're doing approximate match. Because if you put a comma and then close parentheses like this, it won't work. The way they designed it is for lazy people like us. Since we're mostly doing approximate match lookup, you don't even have to put that in. You just, after you put the column number, close parentheses. Now when I hit enter, 151.25. And here's the magic. I can change this to any number. Let's put 78. And just like that, VLOOKUP looked the 78 up, raced through, bumped into the first bigger one. It knew that this was the row or the category, and it counted on its fingers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and went and got that and brought it back to the cell. Now think about that, F2. What does VLOOKUP do? It looks something up, tries to find the right match in the first column to figure out which row. But ultimately, what VLOOKUP does is it goes and gets something and brings it back to the cell. This is so cool. I just want to do this all day long. This person made 129. Let's see if it'll work now. Enter. Sure enough, it got the right row, and it went and got the right earnings through the previous categories. Now I'm going to Control Z, Z, Z to get back to 137. Now we need to do the same exact VLOOKUP, but now we need to get the thing from column 4. Equals VL tab. What's the lookup value? Just like you and I would have to look this up to go and try and find a match in the first column, so does VLOOKUP. Comma. Table array. That's the entire table. First column has to be sorted, smallest to biggest, and then you put all of the other columns in. Comma. Column index, you got to tell VLOOKUP which one of the columns has the thing you want to go and get. Since we're looking up number made through previous category, we put a 4. If you're doing approximate match, you don't even go to the final argument. That's your formula. Close parentheses and enter. And sure enough, it totally got the correct number made through previous category. Now we need pay per unit. You know what? I made a typing error here. This should be pay per unit. We need to get pay per unit from column 3 equals VL tab. What do we need to look up? We look up the 137, comma. We give VLOOKUP the entire table. First column sorted, all remaining columns. Comma. What column? It's 3. We put a 3 here, and it tells VLOOKUP to go get the thing from the third column. Close parentheses and enter. And sure enough, it got the correct pay per unit for this category. Now we put it all together. Equals earnings from previous categories plus, in parentheses, we take the total units made minus the units we looked up. That's the amount from the previous category. Close parentheses times 175. And when I hit enter, 163.50. And this is automatic. If I change this to 74, just like that, that's the correct total. Now I'm going to Control Z. Why would we go through all of this trouble of making the table and then creating all these different formulas just to get to one number? That's why. If I put 51 here, it calculates the exact right answer. But it gets better. Now I'm going to Control Z. Let's go over to the sheet VP VLOOKUP 2. We work in payroll. And every day we get all of these people, and we simply want to enter the numbers in and have all of their gross pays automatically calculate. We can do that. We create the formula for one row, copy it down, and we're done. Now, again, the beauty of our lookup table is we can copy it and paste it wherever we want. So I come back over to this sheet right here, click in B17, Control V. So there's our lookup table. Earnings made through previous categories equals VL tab. As a relative cell reference, I'm going to click on the employees number of units made, comma, table, the entire table. Do not accidentally highlight that category. That's just for us to look at, not to use. It's got to be that first column sorted, smallest to biggest, all the way over to the fifth column. Now I need to lock this with the F4 key. Now I comma. Earnings is in the fifth column. So I tell VLOOKUP, go get the thing in the fifth column. I do not need that last argument because I'm doing approximate match. Close parentheses. Control Enter. Double click and send it down. Now I'm going to totally cheat. Watch this. F2. Remember, we use Excel because it makes our job easy in terms of how fast we can create a solution and the accuracy. I'm going to copy this in edit mode. Control C, escape. And over here, I'm going to paste it. Control V, and guess what? The only thing I have to change is which column I want to go and get something from. Number made through previous category is column 4. Control Enter. Double click and send it down. Now I'm going to go to the last cell in both of these in F2, making sure the cell references are working. Escape. F2. Looking good. Now I still have the copied VLOOKUP over here, so I put the cell in edit mode, Control V, and now pay per unit. Well, that's the third column of our lookup table. So I change it to 3. Control Enter. Double click and send it down. Now gross pay is simple enough. Equals, I need to get the total amount from all the previous categories, plus, in parentheses, the total units that the employee made, minus the upper limit from the previous category, close parentheses, times pay per unit. Control Enter. And we're not worrying about rounding because we don't have any problem. These are all pennies. These are all units. So double click and send it down. Go to the last cell and hit F2. That's looking good. F2. That one is looking good too. That is the power of VLOOKUP. By the way, this is a business math class, but of course, we're learning Excel because that's what people use in the business world. And not just the business world, everywhere calculations are made. But here's the good news. This is the first time we've seen the VLOOKUP. We'll get to see it a number of different times throughout the rest of the class. And employers, when they're hiring people, and Excel is important, they love to ask in the interview, what does VLOOKUP do? So what does VLOOKUP do? No problem. It's easy. It actually looks at something, finds a match in the first column, and goes and gets something and brings it back to the cell. That is amazing. Now notice here, F2, these cell references are pointing to a cell. So the blue one, D8, is pointing towards a cell. But in that cell is a VLOOKUP. Right here, that's just looking at units. Right there, that's looking at a cell that contains VLOOKUP. Same with that one. Instead of doing 1, 2, 3, 4 columns, if we copied the VLOOKUP from each one of those cells and simply pasted them in the right place, we could create our gross pay formula in a single column. So let's go to the next sheet. I call this MASH. For mashup, we're going to mash all of these formulas into a single cell. Now, I like to put a little note because this is a really hard formula. I'm looking at the formula. I see the first one is column 5. That one's the units. The second one is the purple one. That's column 4. And this is column 3. So I like to put a little note off to the side just to remind me. So as I'm building this super long formula, I know I need VLOOKUP with 5 plus the units minus VLOOKUP with the 4 times VLOOKUP with a 3. Now, I'm going to show you a tricky way to do this. F2, I want to copy this in edit mode, but I'm going to click Escape. I first want to go to the Home Ribbon tab, and this is called the Clipboard group. We don't use this except for to do Paste Special occasionally because we know the keyboards and we use the mini toolbar for Format Painter. But right here, this is called a dialog launcher. If I click this, it will launch the clipboard. You can already see it's got the thing stored up from the last time we copied something. Look at close. It says VLOOKUP 5. So watch this. I'm going to come over here and very carefully copy VLOOKUP 4 in edit mode. But I'm not highlighting the equal sign, just the VLOOKUP, Control-C. And look at that. The clipboard will collect all of the different things that you are copying, and then we can paste them in any order. Escape. Now I'm going to come over to this column, F2. Very carefully, I'm going to copy VLOOKUP 3 without the equal sign, Control-C. Now they are all gathered up there. Escape. Now I can come over here, looking at my little prompt. I'm going to click to paste it. And look at that. F2. Now I need to continue my formula. Plus, in parentheses, whatever the units are for the employee, minus, okay, V4. So now I come over and I click on V4. This is like magic. Don't forget, you got to put the close parentheses. Now, here's a cool trick. Notice that one's black. This one's orange. As soon as I close parentheses, I can see the black one matches up with the black one. Now I need to multiply. So I multiply, and now I come over to the clipboard and click on VLOOKUP 3. And just like that, that formula, Control-Enter, will calculate every single gross pay. Go to the last cell, F2. That is absolutely amazing. If I were to remove all this, that thing works like a charm. So in essence, you could just have this for your payroll table. Now, I just messed all of this up, but that is pretty amazing. I'm going to Control-Z to leave that as a trail. All right, so VLOOKUP, what great power it brings to automating calculations like for variable piecework gross pay calculation. Now, we want to move on and talk about commission rates. But before we do that, since we just learned VLOOKUP for the first time, I want to go over to the sheet Lookup is Everywhere, because we've just seen one example of how to use VLOOKUP with a lookup table. But in business and all other fields, there are hundreds of different lookup tables where we might need to use VLOOKUP. If I gave you this table right here and asked, if your sales were $6,000, what was your commission? Well, in this table, you just get paid a flat amount. Well, we take the 6,000, race through, bump into the first bigger one, jump back, and we know that our commission would be 200. How about this one right here? What is the price for quad? Now, this doesn't match our approximate match lookup, but this is an incredibly common lookup situation. We'll actually get to see this 2 weeks ahead when we do invoicing. If I asked you what the price for quad is, you would easily go, OK, well, there's the quad. Go over to the third column and tell me that the price was $43.95. Here's the example we just did, variable piecework. 120 items, well, you would know that this is the row we need for our calculations. In our next example, we'll do variable commission rate table. But if I told you your sales were 7,500, could you pick the correct row? Yes, you could. Here's the lower limit. You race through until you find the first one bigger, jump back, and you know that all three of the numbers you need for making a commission rate calculation are in this row. How about this lookup table example? If I asked you what Chuck's, Hal's zip code was, could you tell me? Absolutely. You'd find the match in the first column, jump over to the zip code column, and tell me it's 98111. How about this? This is yet another lookup table example. What region does Josephina Miles represent? Well, you'd find a match in the first column and tell me, well, Josephine represents the Southwest. How about this example? If your income was $3,000, what was the tax that you had to pay according to this lookup table? Well, you take the 3,000, race through, find the first one bigger, jump back, and you tell me the tax is $60. So we've seen just our first example of VLOOKUP, but throughout the rest of the class, we'll get to see lots of other examples where we have lookup tables, and VLOOKUP will make our life easy. Now, we want to go over to the sheet Straight Commission Rate and talk about commission rates. Now, calculating gross pay for straight commission rate, well, if the contract reads base monthly salary is $3,000 plus 1.5% of total sales they made for the month, we can make this calculation. Sue is the employee. Contract says base rate of $3,000. Sue's total sales for the month were $25,000. There's the rate. Now we can do our formula. There's no VLOOKUP here. This is a straight rate. We simply say equals, there's the base salary, plus there's the total sales for the month, times the contractual straight commission rate of 1.5. Notice order of operations will work fine. I'll do multiplying first, then adding. When I hit enter, there's the gross pay for Sue. Now let's go over to the sheet SC2 and look at our second example for straight commission rate. Now I'm going to close the clipboard and zoom in a bit. Our goal on this sheet is to calculate the gross pay for straight commission rate using VLOOKUP and exact match lookup. So this will be the first time we're not doing approximate. We're going to do exact match. Now, the contract reads each employee has no base salary and has a straight commission rate defined by their personal employment contract. The lookup table below shows the commission rate for each employee. Oh, so we have 10 employees listed right here, and we also have each one of their contractual commission rates. So Brandy gets 3.2%. Annis gets 1.4%. Noreen gets 1.7%. Notice the first column of this lookup table has a name. So if I'm over here doing VLOOKUP, I'm going to have to look up exactly the name Brandy Bushy. I'm going to need VLOOKUP to look through the first column, find a match, and then jump over to the second column. Go and get the commission rate and bring it back to the cell. Anytime you're doing VLOOKUP and you're actually looking up not a range of values, but an exact text item, like a name for an employee or a name for a product, then we can use VLOOKUP exact match. So you ready? This will be the first time we've seen equals VL tab but we're going to use VLOOKUP to look up an exact name. Now the lookup value, just like we would have to look at the name, find a match over here, so does VLOOKUP. So I'm going to click on relative cell reference. That's the employee name, comma, the table. Well, we have to show VLOOKUP where the table is. And just as before, first column always has the items we're going to try and match from our lookup value. And then subsequent columns have things we want to go and get and bring back to the cell. Now this table has just 2 columns with the commission rate in the second column. Now I'm going to copy this formula down, and I definitely need that table locked. So now I'm going to use the F4 key to lock it. Now I type a comma, column index. Well, you got to tell VLOOKUP which one of the columns has the thing you want to go and get. So I'm going to tell VLOOKUP, please go to the second column, get that thing, and bring it back. Comma. Since we're looking up some text and trying to find an exact match in the first column, I'm going to double-click exact match and put false in. Now, that false doesn't mean true or false in the logical sense. That false just means, hey, VLOOKUP, now I need you to do exact match lookup. So now we close parentheses, Control-Enter, double-click and send it down. Go to the last cell and hit F2. I'm verifying that the cell reference here is a relative, and that one is locked. Enter. Now, we need to calculate our commission amount. These are daily transactions, so this is the total commission amount for each employee for each day. Later, if we add them all up, that'll be a gross pay. And the calculation requires that we take total sales times the commission rate, and that will give us the commission amount. Now, we're dealing with money, so we have to round. We have extraneous decimals, and we're going to add all these down here. So yes, indeed, all 3 conditions are met for using the round function. In the number argument, I'm going to get the total sales times commission rate, comma, we're rounding to the penny, so we put a 2 for number of digits, close parentheses. Control-Enter, double-click and send it down. I'm going to go to the last cell and hit F2. That's looking good, and Enter. Now, down here, I'm going to Alt equals to get our sum function and redirect it. Now, I want you to notice something funny here. F16 to F45, notice 16 to 45. There are some hidden rows. Now, I'll unhide those in just a moment to show you, but this formula works perfectly fine even though there's some hidden rows there. It will add all of the numbers from F16 to F45. Control-Enter, and that is the total. Now, over here, you could see 28 to 44. If you want to unhide, click on 28, hold, and drag to 44. Now, right-click and point to unhide. You can always tell that something's hidden if you see unhide in your right-click menu. Unhide, and just like that, all of those numbers and formulas were calculated when we double-clicked and sent it down, even though the rows were hidden. Now I'm going to right-click hide, just so we have a smaller data set. Now, we saw F2 how to use VLOOKUP with exact match. That means every time you use VLOOKUP to look something up in a lookup table, you have to decide whether to use false for exact match or leave it omitted altogether when you're doing approximate match. Now I'm going to click Escape. All right, so we saw 2 examples of how to do straight commission rate. In this example here, each employee had their own straight commission rate, so we took the actual rate and multiplied it by all the sales. But now we need to look at how to do variable commission rate. So I want to go over to the sheet VC1. All right, so here's the explanation for our variable commission rate. Our goal is to build a variable commission rate lookup table, and the lucky thing is we can build it almost exactly like our variable piecework lookup table. Then we need to calculate the pay for variable commission rate using VLOOKUP and approximate match lookup. Now, each employee has no base salary and uses the variable commission rates. There they are. So the actual sales from 0 to 50,000 earned 3.5%. 50,001 penny all the way up to 125,000 get 4%. All the way down to 225,001 penny or more gets a 10%. That means we have to calculate sales at each individual category. Once we create our table, then we can use it over and over, including to calculate each one of the employees' sales gross pay. All right, so I'm going to start in cell B15. Remember, we always start with the lower limit, and this isn't units, it is sales. Lower limit, tab. Sales, upper limit, tab. Commission rate, tab. This column is going to be amount of sales through previous categories. And finally, fifth column will be the commission dollar amount through all the previous categories. Now, I'm going to highlight these and add some formatting. Home ribbon tab, there's wrap text. Right-click on the mini toolbar. There's some fill. There's some font. If I'm counting up here, there's 6 categories, so I'm going to highlight. Right-click, and on the mini toolbar, I'm going to say All Borders. Now, we're simply going to look up here for the upper limit. Now, lower limit, that's going to be 0, tab. The upper limit for the first category is 50,000. And enter. Now, just as we did with our variable piece rate, this number right here is always going to be 1 penny more than the upper limit of our sales. So I'm simply going to say, hey, look at the previous upper limit, and please add 0.01 a penny. Control Enter. Now I can copy this down. That's more accurate and quicker to create than actually typing it out. Now I'm simply reading the upper limits and typing them in. 225,000 and enter. This is going to be more. Enter. Now we could highlight this, including that text right there, and add some currency, accounting or currency, whichever one you want. I'm going to say currency. Now the commission rate, we're simply reading it from here and typing it in. All right, so I entered those. Now I will highlight, go up to the Home Ribbon tab. If you like better, Control-1, percentage, there you go, and enter. Now we're going to highlight these because these are formulas. Right-click Mini Toolbar. We definitely want to add our green. All of these will be formulas for, so I'm going to add that green. I want zeros for our first category. Now, amount of sales through the previous categories. Well, we already have the upper limit, so I can simply point towards the upper limit from the previous category, Control-Enter, and copy it down. Now, the first category, just as we saw when we built the variable piecework lookup table, it's a simpler calculation than the remaining columns. I just have to take all of the upper limit from the previous category and multiply it by our commission rate. Oh, I can see I didn't spell that correctly. All right, so I spelled it correctly. So we have our first category. Now we've got to figure out how to do this second one. Well, I know I have the previous amount, so down here we'll add. But for this category, I need to add the actual total amount from the previous category to whatever the cumulative is amount from above. So just as we did before, we actually have to calculate the total amount possible for that category right there. Well, if 125,000 is the upper limit and 50,000 is the upper limit from the previous category, we can simply subtract those two. But we have those two numbers right here. So I'm going to say 125,000 minus the 50,000. Close parentheses. Control-Enter. That just gives us the total amount of sales for category 2. F2, now I have to multiply it by the commission rate from the previous category. Control-Enter. Now, F2, guess what? We have extraneous decimals here, and we're dealing with money. And we're going to use these in formulas down here So we actually have to round that whole thing right there. Also, notice I already have a parenthesis there. So if I try to type round, I see the blue round in the dropdown. If I hit tab, the round function will steal that parentheses right there. Watch this, tab. So anytime you have a parentheses there and you try to hit tab, you got to remember to retype the parentheses. Now in number, we have what we want. Come to the end, comma, 2, close parentheses, Control Enter. That's still not complete. That is the total amount possible from the previous category. But since the column has to be all previous amounts, now we have to F2 and be sure to add the previous cumulative total. Now that formula will work. Control Enter. Copy it down. Go to the last cell, hit F2. That is looking good. Now, just as we did before, I do not want to leave this much different formula here and then have a completely different formula here. Luckily, I can copy this up. And F2, of course, now it's looking at zeros, and it works fine. I just did that one different calculation just so as we were creating it for the first time, it made more sense. Now we have our lookup table. Now I want to remind ourselves this is the column number. And this is the first column because this has the lower limits. Each one of these numbers means that's the first possible number that we could get that will allow us to look at this row for our calculation. That's column 1, tab 2, tab 3, tab 4, tab 5. That is absolutely beautiful. We have built from variable commission rate information, we have built our lookup table. Now we can use this over and over. Now I'm going to cheat here. I need to put the labels here. And I'm going to say equals, since I want that exact same label right there. I'm going to put an equal sign, tab, equal sign, click on column header number 4, tab, equal sign. That's the commission rate, tab, and then this will be our gross pay, and enter. All right, so what do we have? 1, 2, 3 different VLOOKUPs. But we're doing this for our ultimate gross pay based on a variable commission rate employee contract. All right, you ready? Equals VL tab, lookup value. Well, now we're doing approximate match because I need to look up the sales, race through here, find the first one bigger, which looks like it would be that one, and jump back. So I put in sales amount, comma, table array. First column is sorted, smallest to biggest, all the way to the end. F4 to lock it because we're going to copy it down. Comma, column index number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The fifth column is what I'm trying to go and get and bring back to the cell. I don't need that last argument because I'm doing approximate match. That is such a short and beautiful formula. The power of VLOOKUP. Close parentheses, Control Enter. It definitely got the correct commission amount from all the previous categories. Double click and send it down. Go to the last cell and hit F2. Now, I don't want to have to recreate these, so watch this. F2, I'm going to, in edit mode, copy the entire formula, including the equal sign, Control-C in edit mode, escape. Now, put it in edit mode. I double-click, Control-V, and I'm changing this because now for this whole column, I need to retrieve the items from the fourth column. So I type a 4. That 4 tells VLOOKUP. When you look up and find the correct category or row, you're going to go and get the item from the fourth column. Tab, F2, Control-V. This column, commission rate is 3, so I put a 3. Control-Enter. Now I'm going to highlight these two and double-click and send it down. Go to the last cell, hit F2. That is looking good. Relative cell reference and locked. How about right here? F2. Sure enough, relative cell reference and locked. Those are looking good. Now I can make my gross pay calculation. Well, for Abdi, that's this category right here. Those are all the sales from all the previous categories. We have that number right there. That number is the amount of sales shown right there, 175. That's the upper limit from the previous category, but that represents all of the sales that have already been calculated in that 7,625. So because Abdi made 214,000, we need to take that amount minus the 175 in parentheses and multiply it by the commission rate. Notice the formula is very similar to what we did for variable piece rate. Equals, I'm going to arrow over to get commissions from all the previous categories. Add it to, in parentheses, now I need to take total sales for Abdi, subtract the upper limit from the previous category, or another way to think about that is those are all of the sales that have already been calculated in the 7,625. So I subtract those, close parentheses. That little amount right there is the amount that we need to multiply by 7.5. So times, there's the 7.5. That formula, Control-Enter, copy down. Go to the last cell and hit F2. That is looking awesome. Now, I think I made a mistake here because I'm going to have to add these. And if I'm F2 looking at this correctly, did I not multiply with some extraneous decimals? This is money. And I'm going to add it down here. So I forgot to round. Now, we could round the whole thing. That's fine. You wouldn't be marked off for that, and it would be a correct formula. But notice that amount right there is commissions from previous category. And that's already been correctly rounded up here. So all I have to round is this. And I'm going to have to be careful again. There's that parentheses. Now, you can actually just type in. I'm going to do it round parentheses. That way I don't have to worry. Come to the end, comma, 2, close parentheses. That will work. Control-Enter, and copy it down. Now I can come to the last cell, Alt equals, highlight, and Enter. And I am so glad that I was able to read this variable commission rate data, build a lookup table, so that I could create a single row of formulas that I could copy down and calculate the correct gross pay for each employee. Now, just as we did with our variable piece rate, if I want, I could realize that that's a VLOOKUP. That's a VLOOKUP, and so is that one. So watch this. I'm going to do the calculation off to the side. Control-C, Control-V, just to get the formatting and everything, and delete all this. And I'm sort of going to cheat in a couple different ways. Watch this. I'm going to copy this in edit mode because those are relative cell references. So I'm going to Control-C, Escape. Come over here. And notice all I need to do is go and copy from edit mode and then paste that VLOOKUP in the right place. So Control-Enter. And last time we did this, we used the clipboard. But really, for VLOOKUP, that 5 just needs to be changed to the right column because that VLOOKUP is the same in each one of these cells. So I'm just going to highlight just the VLOOKUP part, not the equal sign. Control-C in edit mode, Escape. And now in edit mode, I'm going to highlight the cell by double-clicking D27. That's the blue one. That's the 5th column. So now I'm going to Control-V. Notice I had the cell reference highlighted. I didn't have to delete it. I just pasted it, and it replaced it. Now, I'm going to double-click E27. That's the purple one right there. Amount of sales through the previous categories. So that's column 4. So watch this. When I Control-V, I'm immediately looking at the 5. I'm thinking, no, that's not right. So I have backspace and 4. All right. One last VLOOKUP. I double-click F27. I'm looking right there. Commission rate, well, that's the 3rd column. So with that cell highlighted, when I Control-V, it pastes the VLOOKUP. But the 5 is not right. So backspace 3. And you got to be kidding me. That is one crazy long formula. Control-Enter, and copy it down. If I were to remove all this, our formula works. A single formula pointing towards the sales and lots of VLOOKUPs, and we have our amount. Now I'm going to Control Z. One thing to remember, since you're just learning for the first time, this building a formula in multiple steps works for beginner Excelers and all the way to the most advanced. I don't think I could really create this formula all in one swoop, but I could build it piece by piece and then mash it all together into a single formula. All right, so that is variable commission rates, building our VLOOKUP table and using VLOOKUP. We have one last example in this video. We want to go over to the sheet commission rate based on sales amount. Now we've seen 4 different incentive pay examples so far, and this is the 5th one. Now the contract for the employee reads, salesperson gets a base salary of $2,000 plus a percentage of total sales they made for the month based on the commission rate determined by the below table. But the rate is not a variable rate where we have a different rate for each category. The employee will simply get paid the same commission rate for all of the sales they make, but the single rate is determined by the amount of their sales. So we use this lookup table simply to find where the employee sits. But once we find the category, we use that one rate times all of their sales. That means we're going to do an approximate match lookup, but it's going to be a much more simple lookup table. In fact, all we have to do is type this out. So down here in cell B17, I went ahead and typed this out. This is all just typing. The labels at the top, these are the lower limits. Remember, if we're going to do approximate match lookup, the first column always has to have the lower limits. Then, for this lookup table, we only have one column. The second column has the commission rate that we want to go and get and bring back to the cell. Now, the employment contract says base salary plus we have to look up the right commission rate and then multiply that single percentage times the total sales. Now, Kenya did awesome. Look at this. If we're doing approximate match lookup, I'm looking this up, racing through trying to find the first one bigger, but there's none that are bigger. Look at that. That's nearly 4 times bigger than the final category. So, of course, we'll take the last category, and the percentage commission rate that she'll earn is 5.25%. All right, let's see if I can do the VLOOKUP part of this. Equals VL tab, lookup value. That's the value we want VLOOKUP to look up and find a match in the first column, comma, the table. Highlight, first column is sorted, smallest to biggest, and the second column has the thing we want to go and get. We're not copying this anywhere, so we don't need to lock it. Comma. Second column, so I put a 2. That tells VLOOKUP. Please go and get the thing from the second column and bring it back to the cell. We're doing approximate match, so we don't put anything more. Close parentheses, Control Enter. Uh-oh. Don't get tricked by number formatting. That's got currency there. Let's wipe it away either using the Home drop-down for General or our keyboard. Control-Shift-tilde grave accent. That's much better. Kenya likes getting 5.25 pennies for every $1 of sales rather than just 5. Now, let's click in the cell F2. For the commission part of her gross pay, we need to multiply that rate that VLOOKUP is delivering times the total sales. Now, Control-Enter. That's the amount of the total sales. And I'm not going to worry about rounding since we're never going to use this in a subsequent formula. F2, we still have to add plus the base rate. Control-Enter. Oh, look at that. That last cell reference right there pulled the number formatting. So that's Kenya's gross pay. Now, in this example, we used VLOOKUP approximate match, but we didn't have to run multiple VLOOKUPs to get multiple items from a lookup table. This contract says no. We just find the one rate and use that times all of the sales. All right, that was an epic video all about incentive pay. We talked about piecework, straight and variable. We talked about commission rate, straight and variable. And we even talked about this example where we have an increasing commission rate, but once we find the actual commission rate, we simply use it times the total sales. All right, hey, there's a bunch of homework over here. There's 8 awesome homework problems for you to do and practice. And in this video, we talked about all the way back at the beginning, we talked about incentive pay, straight piecework, variable piecework, straight commission and variable commission rate. For variable commission rate and variable piece rate, we very importantly saw how to build a lookup table and then use VLOOKUP. We also saw one example, and I'll go back to the sheet, a straight commission rate where each employee had a straight commission rate, but we had to look up the employee name to get the right commission rate. And then finally, the 5th different type of incentive pay, it is a single commission rate, but it gets higher and higher the more sales you make. All right, if you like that video, be sure to click that thumbs up, leave a comment, and sub, because there's always lots more videos to come from excelisfun, including the next couple videos we'll finally get to payroll deductions. All right, we'll see you next video.